Nadja Auermann, born March 19, 1971, in Berlin, Germany, became one of the most striking faces of the 1990s supermodel era. With her icy blonde hair, impossibly long legs, the longest ever recorded among top models at 44 inches, and ethereal presence, Nadja embodied a new European ideal of beauty. She rose quickly to fame, becoming the face of fashion houses like Chanel, Versace, and Dior. But beneath the flawless surface was a story of pressure, isolation, legal troubles, and a brutal media machine that commodified perfection while discarding the woman beneath it. Her life reflects deeper questions about the cost of beauty, the exploitation of female icons, and how the industry erases women once they step away. The lights dim. A single spotlight cuts through the darkness, falling onto a figure suspended in time, a woman frozen mid-stride on the runway. Cameras flash like lightning. The crowd holds its breath. For a moment, the world belongs to her. Nadja Auermann. The name rolls through fashion history like a whispered spell. Her image is everywhere, plastered on billboards in Paris, glowing on magazine covers in Tokyo, staring back from glossy pages in New York. Her beauty is almost unnatural, like a sculpture come to life. Icy blonde hair, porcelain skin, endless legs, 44 inches of symmetry that once earned her a place in the Guinness Book of Records. She became fashion's snow queen, untouchable, immaculate, flawless. But behind the perfection is a silence. Behind the image is a woman who never quite spoke. The 1990s were the golden age of supermodels. Naomi, Claudia, Christy, Linda, they didn't just model clothes, they ruled the world. Runways became their kingdoms, magazines their thrones. The fashion industry wasn't just selling fabric, it was selling dreams, identities, archetypes. And in this spectacle, Nadja emerged not as the loudest voice, but as the coldest vision. She was different, detached, distant. She wasn't the girl next door. She was the woman you could never reach. The camera adored her. Designers worshipped her. The world projected its fantasies onto her stillness. In a decade obsessed with image, she became the ultimate mirror. Archival footage plays, Nadja in slow motion on a Versace runway, head high, walking like she was gliding through another world. Backstage, assistants flutter around her like moths to a flame. Flashbulbs explode. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't speak. And this silence, this icy composure, became her power. Yet, it was also a mask. A carefully constructed facade. The industry didn't ask what she felt. It didn't need to. As long as the image was perfect, the woman beneath it could remain invisible. As the voiceover continues, the scene slows down even more, her eyes lock with the camera lens. For a split second, the mask cracks. There's a flicker. Something unspoken. Loneliness? Defiance? It's impossible to tell. But it's there. Nadja's story doesn't begin with fame. It begins in a divided Berlin, in a country rebuilding its identity. She was a young girl waiting tables, unaware that history, both personal and cultural, was about to shift. When the wall came down, a new kind of beauty crossed into the global stage. And Nadja, unknowingly, became its face. But before that chapter unfolds, we return once more to the frozen image. A single frame. A goddess on the runway. Fashion will immortalize this moment. Magazines will call it perfection. Designers will build empires on it. But what happens when the image becomes heavier than the person? When the silence that protects also isolates? This is not just the story of a model. It is the story of how beauty is built, sold, and eventually abandoned. Nadja Auermann's life is a portrait, one that glimmers under the runway lights, but fractures in the shadows backstage. The spotlight fades. The cameras fall silent. And the woman behind the image finally begins to emerge. Before the flashbulbs, before the world called her perfect, Nadja Auermann was just a girl in a divided city. Berlin in the 1970s was a place of contrasts, a city split not only by ideology, but by walls of silence and suspicion. On one side, Western modernity pulsed with consumerism and pop culture. On the other, the East was rigid, controlled, cautious. Nadja was born in East Berlin in 1971, into a world where dreams were measured carefully and beauty was not yet a currency. Her childhood unfolded under the weight of history. Concrete buildings, long winters, ration lines. But even in this environment, something about her stood out. Tall, fair, and strikingly composed, she moved through the city like someone from another time. She didn't grow up surrounded by the glamour of Paris or Milan. She grew up with stories whispered through cracks in the wall, with Western magazines smuggled like secrets, with an imagination that stretched far beyond the gray streets. The Berlin Wall loomed in the background of her life, a symbol of division, a physical barrier that shaped identities, dreams, and futures. For many, it meant a lifetime confined. For Nadja, it meant that her beauty was locked away from a world that didn't yet know her name. Then, history shifted. 1989, the wall fell. A single night that rewrote the destiny of millions. For some, it meant freedom. For others, uncertainty. For Nadja, it quietly opened a door she didn't even know existed. East met West, and suddenly, the eyes of the world turned toward Germany, searching for new symbols, new faces that could represent this rebirth. She wasn't discovered in a glamorous way. There was no dramatic catwalk moment or glitzy scouting event. She was working as a waitress in a cafe when a modeling scout noticed her. It was almost accidental, like fate brushing past her in a crowded street. One day she was serving tables. The next, her photograph was on a desk in Paris. There's something poetic about that. A girl from a city once walled in, being chosen to represent a borderless ideal of beauty. She wasn't chasing fame. It found her. In interviews, Nadja rarely spoke about this time in detail. But those who knew her remember a quiet young woman, intelligent, observant, not swept away easily. She carried the weight of a country's transformation with her, unknowingly becoming part of Germany's new cultural export, a modern, sleek, European image. The Berlin she left behind was changing fast. The fashion world she was about to enter moved even faster. She was stepping from one world into another, from concrete streets to catwalks, from history's shadows to fashion's blinding lights. This was the true beginning. Not in a designer studio, not under the eyes of Karl Lagerfeld, but in a city learning to breathe freely again, and a young woman quietly preparing to step into destiny. Some stories begin with ambition. Others with accident. Nadja Auermann's began with a quiet moment in a cafe. It was the early 1990s. Berlin was still trembling from the fall of the wall, a city alive with new freedoms, buzzing with possibilities, raw and uncertain. Nadja was a teenager, working as a waitress to support herself. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't dreaming of Paris runways or fashion editorials. Her world was simple: work, home, and the chaotic rhythm of a country rebuilding itself. And then, fate intervened. One afternoon, a modeling scout walked into the cafe. Among the noise of clinking cups and soft conversations, a single glance changed everything. Nadja's height, her long limbs, her pale, sculptural face, it was as if the world had carved her from marble and set her down in that cafe just to be found. The scout approached her. An invitation. A suggestion. A possibility she had never considered. For Nadja, it wasn't a starry-eyed yes, it was cautious curiosity. She didn't grow up with fashion posters on her wall. She didn't know the language of agencies and portfolios. But something in the timing felt inevitable. Berlin's modeling scene was small but growing. Agencies were eager to find new faces that embodied a modern Germany, sophisticated, striking, global. Nadja signed with an agency almost as a formality, not realizing she was about to step onto a path very few could imagine. Her first test shots were taken in natural light, no extravagant styling, just Nadja, standing still, looking directly into the lens. The results stunned everyone. There was a stillness in her face, an otherworldly calm that photographers found magnetic. She didn't need to pose, she simply was. Within months, her photos landed in the hands of international scouts. Paris took notice. Vogue took notice. Designers, always hungry for the next face, saw something in Nadja that didn't need explanation. She wasn't the American bombshell or the Mediterranean siren. She was something new. Ethereal. Untouchable. By 1991, she was on a plane to Paris, a young woman from East Berlin stepping into the center of fashion's universe. She arrived quietly, not with the bravado of someone who expected to conquer the world, but with the poise of someone who had nothing to prove. In a world full of models desperately trying to be seen, Nadja was discovered by simply being. She didn't audition for the spotlight. It found her in a moment of chance. This accidental discovery would become the catalyst for a meteoric rise. What began in a cafe would soon echo through runways in Milan, editorials in Vogue Paris, and campaigns for the world's most powerful fashion houses. History is often written in grand gestures. But sometimes, it begins with a single look across a crowded room and a face the world would never forget. Every era of fashion has its muses, women who don't just wear clothes, but redefine what beauty means. For Nadja Auermann, that transformation happened almost overnight. When she arrived in Paris in the early 1990s, the city was the beating heart of fashion. Supermodels weren't just faces, they were cultural forces. Designers were searching for something fresh, a vision that would set the next decade apart. And then, Nadja appeared. Her first major editorial shoots were with some of fashion's most legendary photographers, Peter Lindbergh, Ellen von Unworth, and Helmut Newton. Through their lenses, she was no longer the girl from East Berlin. She became a figure of myth. Lindbergh captured her as a timeless beauty, almost statuesque in her serenity. Unworth, known for her playful sensuality, found in Nadja an unexpected mix of innocence and strength. Newton, with his sharp eye and love for provocative imagery, turned her into a cold, powerful icon, a woman who didn't ask to be looked at, she commanded it. The transformation was astonishing. Her face began appearing on the pages of Vogue Paris, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle with increasing frequency. Her legs, famously measured at 44 inches, became the subject of fascination. Fashion critics described her as the new ideal, a modern goddess in human form. What made Nadja different wasn't loud personality or scandal. It was presence. She didn't have to perform. She stood still, and the industry moved around her. She had a rare ability to embody whatever narrative the photographer or designer imagined, ethereal, severe, playful, or regal, like a canvas that held infinite possibilities. Designers quickly noticed. She was cast in couture shows not for her fame. She wasn't famous yet, but because clothes seemed to belong to her body. She didn't just model garments, she elevated them. Karl Lagerfeld called her a living mannequin of the future, while Versace loved her elegance amid chaos. Backstage, she remained quiet, observant. Other models were loud, laughing, socializing. Nadja was the calm in the storm. To some, this made her mysterious. To the industry, it made her unforgettable. She wasn't trying to be anyone. She simply became whatever the moment required. In this period, Nadja wasn't just being styled, she was being mythologized. The girl who once served coffee was now the muse of giants, her face pinned on mood boards, her walk analyzed, her stillness turned into power. The metamorphosis was complete. Nadja Auermann had crossed the invisible line between model and icon. This was more than a career shift. It was the birth of an image that would define an era, and quietly, the woman behind it was being left further and further in the shadows. There are certain moments in fashion when a single pairing between a designer and a model creates magic, when an image becomes history. For Nadja Auermann, that moment came when she met Karl Lagerfeld. Chanel in the early 1990s wasn't just a fashion house, it was a cultural empire. Under Lagerfeld's command, the brand had transformed from the elegance of Coco into a vision of modern power, sharp, dramatic, sometimes ironic, always iconic. And he was searching for faces that could carry that vision into the future. When Nadja walked into a Chanel casting, the room fell silent. She wasn't the loudest or the most charismatic. She simply stood there, icy blonde hair cascading over flawless shoulders, posture regal, eyes distant. Lagerfeld was instantly captivated. To him, She was a figure from another world, part goddess, part sculpture, part mystery. She became one of his favorites almost immediately. Within months, Nadja was walking in Chanel's haute couture shows, a stage reserved for fashion's elite. Wearing tightly tailored suits, delicate lace, or cascading tweed, she moved down the runway like she was born for it. Her long, almost architectural silhouette brought a new dimension to Chanel's image. She wasn't the playful French muse. She was the futuristic empress. Karl adored control, precision, and elegance. Nadja embodied all three without effort. She didn't flirt with the camera, she confronted it. She didn't smile on the runway, she held the gaze. In a fashion world dominated by personalities like Naomi Campbell's fierce energy or Claudia Schiffer's sunlit glamour, Nadja brought a cold, magnetic presence that no one else could replicate. Her Chanel campaigns became some of the most memorable of the decade. Photographed in black and white, she stood against minimalist backdrops, her angular features framed like art. Her image was often accompanied by words like timeless, modern classic, and untouchable. Karl would refer to her as the future wrapped in elegance. But this elevation came with a quiet cost. Chanel was not just using her beauty, it was shaping it, polishing it, packaging it. She was no longer Nadja the girl from Berlin. She had become Nadja, the Chanel woman, an ideal of elegance that existed more on paper than in reality. Backstage, she remained composed. While others reveled in the spectacle, Nadja absorbed it like a distant observer. To her, perhaps, it was all happening too fast. 1 year ago, she was a waitress. Now, she was the centerpiece of fashion's most powerful house. Chanel gave Nadja the world. It placed her at the pinnacle of the runway hierarchy, making her one of the most in-demand faces of the 1990s. But it also set the standard she would forever be compared against. Once you become Chanel's muse, the world expects you to remain flawless, frozen in that perfection. This was the beginning of her reign. And, unknowingly, the foundation of the cage that beauty was quietly building around her. In fashion, image isn't just everything, it's the only thing. For Nadja Auermann, her image became both a masterpiece and a mask. By the mid-1990s, her face was everywhere. Vogue covers, Versace campaigns, Mugler runways, she wasn't just part of the fashion world, she had become one of its defining symbols. Photographers adored her because she didn't merely photograph well, she transformed in front of the camera. In a single frame, she could look like a futuristic goddess, a porcelain doll, or a dangerous, untouchable queen. This was the power of Nadja's image, silence that spoke louder than words. Peter Lindbergh captured her as timeless, stripped of heavy makeup, in black and white, her gaze steady and contemplative. Helmut Newton saw danger in her stillness, shooting her like a figure of dominance and control. Ellen von Unworth highlighted her softness, giving glimpses of playfulness beneath the ice. Every lens found something different, yet none fully revealed the woman beneath. Her body became a reference point. Those famously long legs, 44 inches of symmetry, were written about in magazines like Curiosities from a Museum. Designers sculpted garments around her proportions. The industry fetishized her measurements, turning them into selling points as if she were both art and advertisement. She wasn't speaking in interviews or crafting a public persona. Instead, the image spoke for her. And in that silence, fashion projected everything it wanted onto her. She became a blank canvas for an entire era's fantasies, modernity, perfection, power. But there's a quiet cruelty in that. Because when the image becomes so strong, the person begins to fade. Nadja's identity was no longer hers alone. It belonged to editors who cropped her face to fit magazine layouts, to designers who dictated how she should walk, to photographers who decided what emotion she should embody. In the public eye, she wasn't Nadja Auermann, a woman from Berlin. She was the Chanel girl, the woman with the longest legs, the ice queen of fashion. Titles layered over her like fabric, until the real woman underneath was almost invisible. Behind the scenes, this image carried immense pressure. The more the world adored her perfection, the less room there was for imperfection. Every appearance, every shoot, every runway, She had to embody a standard so high it didn't belong to reality. She was trapped in her own myth. And yet, for the fashion machine, this was ideal. A model who didn't speak too loudly. A face that could be molded endlessly. A figure who could sell a fantasy better than anyone. The power of Nadja's image built empires for others. Magazines sold out. Designers made millions. Trends were born in her silhouette. But for Nadja, it became something heavier, a beautiful mask she couldn't take off. The world had fallen in love with a reflection. But reflections can't speak back.